I never thought that fear would cripple me, but that night it did. My name is Cool, and the face that still haunts me wasn't real, even though it was a mask. The man behind it, though, he was the true monster. It began innocently enough. I was 21, soaking in the nightlife of Kathmandu, and the neon lights and music made me feel invincible. That's when I met Ashish Dula. People called him Sugar Daddy, but I didn't think much of it. He had a mysterious air about him, always wearing a mask, a grotesque wrinkled face that made him look decades older. It was bizarre and unsettling, but he seemed harmless enough. That night, he took me to an exclusive after-party. My gut was telling me to decline, but the allure of wealth and exclusivity clouded my judgment. He promised something unforgettable, and he was right, just not in the way I expected. The drive to the party seemed interminable, with city lights dwindling to darkness. But the time we arrived at the house, it was looming eerily in darkness, the windows dark, empty sockets. My unease increased, but I entered behind him. The air inside was suffocating, heavy with an unplaceable stench. The room was dim, lit only by a flickering bulb that seemed more like a dying heartbeat than a source of light. Ashish's demeanor changed, the charm went away, and something cold and predatory took its place. "Relax," he said, his voice dripping with false reassurance. Before I could react, hands grabbed me from behind. I thrashed and screamed, but they were too strong. They dragged me into a room and tied me to a chair. Ashish stood in the corner, his mask glowing faintly in the dim light, as if it were alive. "Let's begin," he said softly, almost kindly. The first burn seared into my skin like liquid fire. They heated an iron rod until it glowed red, pressing it against my arm while laughing at my screams. Tears blurred my vision, but I could still see Ashish, watching, tilting his head like I was some experiment. "Do you know why I wear this mask?" he asked, stepping closer. "Because it lets me see who you really are when the fear takes over." They didn't just hurt me, they played with me, feeding on my terror. They'd stop and offer me water and even untie one of my hands, then start again when hope flickered in my chest. One of them brought out nails and a hammer. The sound of the first strike against my finger was drowned out by my own screams. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was Ashish's eyes behind the mask. They were empty, lifeless, as though he wasn't even human. They left me alone at some point, perhaps assuming I was too broken to escape. But adrenaline is a powerful thing. My hands were raw from struggling, but I managed to loosen the ropes. Every movement sent waves of pain through my body, but I didn't stop. The house was all shadows and whispers. I could hear them laughing in another room, their voices echoing like a nightmare. My bare feet barely made a sound on the cold floor as I crept toward the door. Then I saw it, the mask, hanging on a hook by the exit. For a moment I froze, as if it might come to life and stop me, but I forced myself to move. I burst out into the night, the cold air biting into my wounds. I ran, the world a blur of tears and pain until I found a police station. They didn't believe me at first. Who would? My story sounded like the plot of a horror movie. But then the police saw the burns and cuts, and something shifted in his expression. "Tell me everything," he said, and I did. The raid came days later. When they arrested Ashish, he was dancing in his mask, holding a drink like nothing had happened. As they cuffed him, he turned to me, his unmasked face finally revealed. It wasn't the grotesque old man I'd seen before, but a younger, ordinary face. And yet, his eyes were the same, cold, dead, inhuman. "See you soon," he whispered as they led him away. I'm happy that he's behind bars now, and so many innocent lives will be safe. But even today, I cannot sleep without that mask and the ringing of the hammer on my nails. Ashish may be behind bars, but the shadow of Ashish has been there, reminding us that monsters do not always roam in the dark. Sometimes they are among us, carrying masks. Ashish Dula, 33 years old from Nepal, known as Sugar Daddy, has been accused of horrible torture. Dula reportedly befriended teenagers through clubbing, inviting them to his home where he subjected them to severe abuse. including the use of hot iron, drill, and a grinder. Victims have stated that doula derived pleasure from their suffering. Despite coming from a wealthy family, which may affect his legal situation, the case has raised significant concerns about justice and accountability. Have you ever felt what it's like to be high? It's like floating, like being free, like being dead and at peace. Without realizing it, I was already in an office. I had a faint feeling that I was on trial, but I wasn't sure. All I know is that I was in the office of the man who changed my life. 55-year-old Ialiafi, right? It's been hard for you to get here, Victor told me, looking at me as if this was my last chance to save myself. It's true. I spent years trapped in vices, alcohol, drugs, anything that allowed me to forget the storm in my head. And I looked at this therapist and thought he could save me. Idiot. Come, follow me, he said. Stupid voice, I thought at the time, but he took me to a fancy restaurant. Suddenly, I was surrounded by bottles of champagne and gourmet food, although instead of alcohol, he gave me sparkling water, and he made me talk about my problems. He took me to restaurants, to his house, anywhere that would help me stay away from temptation. He treated me like a friend, and although at first I hated those moments, little by little I began to find myself in his conversations, in his advice. I remember when I told him I had a job, when I broke the record of a year without drinking or using drugs. He was so happy for me. Have you ever thought about death? Sometimes he'd ask me these strange questions to keep me on my toes, but I knew he knew what he was saying. Because it's better to die comfortable than to die behind bars. And I think he knew that. I spent those 2 years trying to get my life back, but it didn't work. I wasted my youth on alcohol and drugs, never enjoying a good woman more than a prostitute. I felt like when I went out with a woman my age, the smell of the corner brothel would cloud my nose. But it wasn't easy. Women my age, no, I couldn't stand them. I hated them. I'd say, struggling with a bitter smile. I never felt comfortable. I'm 57 now, 2 years into my treatment, but I've been admiring her for 8 months. Eva, though I didn't know her name then. She was young, fresh, so different from anything I knew. Somehow she became my obsession. I'd seen her in cafes, in shops, everywhere. And of course, as always, I followed her. I never spoke to her. Never. She was 18. But those curves, that body, those lips, that breast. I wanted all of her, to be with her. I imagined it would be like floating under the influence of heroin. At first, I just watched her. But something inside me wanted to be close to her. I couldn't stop thinking about her face, her smile. What would she do if I approached her? Would she accept me? Then, one day, I saw her going into a restaurant with Victor. That broke me. What is he doing with her? I thought angrily. He has no right to be with such a beautiful woman. My hands clenched in my coat pockets. He has no right to talk to her, that idiot. How dare he talk to my goddess? A horrible thought, it consumed me, a need to claim something that wasn't mine. I spoke to Victor soon after, during one of our sessions. You know, I happened to see you go into a restaurant with a very beautiful young woman. You're not dating a young girl, are you? I said, in my most pleasant and joking tone. No, she's Eva, Victor said with a slight smile. A young lady with family problems, but not just my patient anymore. She's now my friend, just like you. Part of me calmed down when I heard that, but another part of me grew angry. How could he call her a friend? I wanted her. I needed her. And he treated her like just another? She seems like a nice young woman. It must be interesting to talk to her. I dared to ask. Victor looked at me, raised an eyebrow. Sometimes it scared me how well he knew me. Sure. In fact, I'm planning to have dinner with some of my patients. It'll be a good opportunity. The dinner was interesting. Eva didn't seem interested in me or what I had to say. Sometimes it seemed that she was just looking down at me, smiling with an expression of indifference. Her eyes sparkled with a kind of emptiness that unsettled me. Her eyes only focused on Victor's painted faces, the luxurious marble floor. I didn't know he was so wealthy. It bothered me, but that look attracted me. When Victor and she began to talk, a part of me broke. I couldn't do anything. I just stood there, frozen. Words wouldn't come out of my mouth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit something, but I just remained silent. "Can I help you with anything?" I asked, my voice weak. Victor looked at me, his face showing something beyond kindness. "You can help me to look for something in the warehouse." And he stole a kiss in front of my eyes. That idiot lied to me. He stayed with her. I kept my cool, but I felt outraged. We went to the back of his house, to his huge storage room in the basement. The lights were dim, and the silence of the place surrounded me. Eva seemed upset. "I want to celebrate something," Victor said. At this point, I hadn't noticed. He said several of his patients would come, but it was just her and me, until suddenly he said something with a subtle tone. "I left her perfect." Eva barely reacted. Neither did I. The next thing I saw was him stabbing her, and she started screaming. But he covered her mouth in a cold way until he finished laughing and said to me in her blood, "This is the only way to enjoy this beautiful body, Ia." I don't remember exactly what happened next. My head started to spin. All I know is that I started using again. The need to escape this nightmare was stronger than anything else. Have you ever felt what it's like to be high? It's like floating, like being free, like being dead and at peace. Everything blurs. I remember coming home to the sound of sirens waking me up. The police were there, investigating Eva's murder. "Yeah, right. I helped hide the body," I said without thinking, as if it were a confession that didn't matter. And there I was, standing before them as if nothing had happened. But my soul had already left, and the officers were disturbed. Was everything I said for them, or was it just in my mind? Isla Bell, a 19-year-old woman from Melbourne, Australia, disappeared on October 4th, 2024, after sending a message to a friend saying she had found the best Russian sugar daddy who had given her gifts and claimed to have rescued her from sex traffickers. 2 days later, police allege Marat Ganiev, 53, killed her in his apartment in St. Kilda East. Security cameras capture what appeared to be a struggle in the kitchen of Ganyev's apartment on October 7, where Isla is seen being punched and falling to the floor. Ganiev was filmed cleaning up the area, and in the following days, her body was found in a landfill on November 19 after being hidden in a refrigerator and moved with the help of Eyal Yafi, a 57-year-old accomplice. Ganiev, who was arrested and charged with murder, denied killing her, but he admitted disposing of the body. When you've been married for 45 years, you notice the little things: a new cologne, a charged smile after reading a text, or a careful avoidance of certain questions. I'd always trusted Thomas, my husband, but last year my instincts told me something was wrong. It started with Gwen Harper. My husband introduced her as a patient's mother. "Kathy, I've been working with a boy who has severe anxiety. His mother, Gwen, is struggling financially. I told her I'd help her connect to resources." I remember meeting Gwen for the first time. She had this surgically enhanced face, a sense of revealing fashion, and a massive bosom, which she couldn't stop flaunting in my Thomas's face.
"Thank you for all you've done for my son, Dr. Bain,"
she had said during dinner.
"I don't know how we'd manage without your kindness."
Thomas beamed like a schoolboy. At first, I believed his story, but little things didn't add up. The anxious son was never mentioned again. Thomas began taking phone calls outside and staying later at the clinic. I found receipts in his pockets, designer handbags, dinners at upscale restaurants. Then, one night, I overheard a conversation. "I can't keep doing this. You promised you'd get back on your feet." I didn't confront him. Maybe it was fear or maybe pride, but I knew he was lying to me. 3 months later, Thomas told me he was heading to Las Vegas for a medical convention. It was the first time in decades he hadn't asked me to come along. "Kathy, it's just 2 nights," he reassured me, fiddling with his watch. "I'll be back before you know it."
Is Gwen going to be there?
What?
Is she going to be there?
I don't know. She is a medical rep, so she might.
Oh, she's a medical rep now. I thought she was a patient's mother.
She's also a medical rep.
What was the issue with her child?
What?
What was the issue with her child?
The ADHD. He's on the spectrum.
Oh, I thought it was severe anxiety.
He looked at me. We both knew what was up. I just wanted to see the glint of guilt in his eyes. I rushed to the washroom and emerged with his wedding ring. He had taken it off and forgotten. The H, my fingers are shrinking. It must have slipped. I took out my necklace, strung it around the ring, and made him wear it around his neck. He dared not say a word about it to me. He left with a small suitcase and his laptop. When 3 days passed without a call or a text, my gut told me something was wrong. I dialed his number repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when I called the police. They found my Thomas's body 2 days later in an abandoned car off a dusty highway outside Vegas. He'd been bludgeoned to death, his head wrapped in a blood-soaked towel. The detective, a tall man with a gravelly voice, laid it out plainly.
"Mrs. Bain, it wasn't random. This was personal."
The investigation unraveled everything. Thomas had been having an affair with Gwen, who was actually an ex-porn star and a struggling hooker. He had been paying her rent, buying her gifts, and covering her bills. It started as charity, a kind-hearted man wanting to help, but Gwen took control. The tipping point came when Thomas stopped sending money. Hotel security footage showed him arguing with Gwen in the hallway outside his room. Witnesses said he threw her out, yelling, "You're a parasite! I'm done!" Gwen didn't take rejection well. She called Rick, her ex-boyfriend, a man with a record as long as my arm. Together, they concocted a plan. Rick brought a tire iron, and they waited for Thomas in the hotel parking lot. According to Gwen's confession, Thomas begged for his life, but Gwen wanted revenge. She told Rick to make it messy. When the police arrested Gwen, she didn't seem remorseful. Her mugshot showed her looking almost bored. There's a moment I can't stop thinking about. The last time Thomas and I had dinner together, he looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. "Kathy," he'd said, putting his hand over mine, "you're my anchor. You've kept me steady all these years." I didn't know how far he'd drifted. Gwen received life in prison without parole. Rick took a plea deal and got 30 years. I still can't believe how easily Thomas was lured into her web. He was a brilliant man, but even the brightest minds can be blinded by desire. The hardest part isn't losing him. It's knowing that in his final moments he was alone, betrayed by the very person he thought he was helping. The only comforting fact, they found him clutching the ring around his neck. This story is inspired by the real-life murder of Dr. Thomas Burchard, a child psychiatrist whose affair with a former Playboy model, Kelsey Turner, ended in tragedy. Burchard financially supported Turner until their relationship soured, leading to an argument in a Las Vegas hotel. Turner, with the help of her ex-boyfriend, murdered him in revenge. His body was found in an abandoned car.